be under the bright lights. I want to be on the Broadway stage.
Tiger Rag Radio is on now.
Jeff Palermo, News and Sports Director of the Louisiana Radio Network, along with the Executive Editor for Tiger Rag Magazine, Todd Horn, and the editor, Glenn Gilbo. And coming up in this hour, a lot more to talk about, especially when it comes to women's basketball. So let's get to our next guest. And he's one of our favorites, and it's that time of year. Sunday, we'll find out the bracket for the Women's NCAA College Basketball Tournament. Charlie Creme, who's been doing the bracketology for ESPN on the women's side for many years now. He joins us here on Tiger Rag Radio. Charlie, how you doing? Charlie,
I'm doing well. I am. Yeah, this is it. We're ready to roll. Teams away from Selection Sunday.
Yeah. You got your bracket ready, man?
I actually have a bracket sitting in front of me right now as we speak. Well, I always have. I have brackets around me all the time.
All right, who's LSU playing? LSU playing?
Let's don't go straight for the juggler. Charlie, I read your story on, I guess it was today on ESPN.com, that sort of foreshadows probably most of this discussion that we're going to have. But, I mean, LSU loses 3 out of 4 of its final games, has all kinds of injuries, adversity strike. And they're not even mentioned in your behemoth of a story. I mean, that story went on for several folds down the page. And there's no LSU. Why is that?
Oh, is this I've written a lot of things, so I'm going to have to take just a brief millisecond here to remember which one we were referring to. I think it was a group one, right? Where Alexa and Marco Volpo also contributed. Yes. Okay. That's a good question. I don't know. I think the focus of the questions was we kind of grouped a lot of the number 1 seeds, and then we kind of went to the top 16, and most of the attention on the top 16 is kind of the teams that were just in or just out. And LSU sort of falls in the middle of those two categories, and I think that's probably why they didn't get mentioned. And I also think, if I'm being honest, that they fall just outside of that group of teams that would be considered kind of betting favorites to win the national championship. If you want to expand the group a little bit, LSU falls in it, but if you really kind of narrow it down to the 5 or 6 teams, most of us think one of those teams will walk away with the championship. LSU's just kind of on the outside of that. And
is that primarily because of their relatively poor performance over the last 2 weeks, or is it because of the injuries, or is it a combination of the two? What do you think it is?
I think it's a combination. I think the injuries create some question marks that, we really won't know the answers to until they step on the floor in the NCAA tournament in a little over a week. And so that's certainly one of the things that's the foremost thing on my mind when I'm looking at LSU is how do we know if flau'jae is completely healthy? How is Moro's ankle foot situation going to be? And they didn't play great down the stretch, and the injuries were certainly a contributing factor to that. So they're definitely tied in. But the injuries are the biggest question mark I have because Moro gets hurt in that semifinal game against Texas, and we don't get to see another game to see if she's recovered or not. So we just have to kind of wait and see, and that's as you're trying to predict long runs in the NCAA tournament without knowing anything. It's sort of hard to do.
Did their performance and their drop in the eyes of the bracketologists or the people who create the brackets, actually make the brackets at the NCAA, does that hurt their chances of advancing based on where they're going to have to go and who they're going to have to play after their first week in Baton Rouge, if they do make it out of Baton Rouge?
I don't think so too much. You're talking about the difference between a 2 and a 3 seed. And in some instances, depending on the matchup, being the 3 is better than being the 2. But in their case, I think in all the brackets that I've done where for most of the time they've been a 2, they've kind of been matched up regionally with UCLA or USC. And right now I have them as a 3 seed in the same region as UCLA. So they didn't really change a lot. It's going to require them being, if they are paired up with USC or UCLA, as those teams in high likelihood being 1 seeds, then they would have to go to Spokane for that regional. But as I said, I've kind of had it that way for a while. So in my mind, it doesn't change a whole lot. And the difference between a 2 and a 3, if chalk is played out, there really isn't a difference. You're still going to have to beat that other team that's the 2 or the 3 to get to your hoped destination, which is regional final and then a Final Four.
Joining the Army is more than a chance to serve your country. It's also a great career move.
All my personal experience, I've been able to build upon that so that I could achieve construction management and training, go for a project manager planner. So when I get out of the military, I'm able to pursue a career in construction management.
Get the experience you need through service in the United States Army.
So when we talked a couple of weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago, you did have LSU rated as one of the top 7 to 10 teams that could win a national championship. Now it sounds like you've narrowed that down to 5 or 6 that could actually win the national championship. If LSU comes out healthy, flau'jae and Isamaro are both healthy and they're playing, full scale, do they have a chance or a good chance, or are they an underdog still?
I think in certain circumstances they'd still be an underdog. But if all 3 are completely healthy and playing at their peak level, then they can beat anybody. In any one single game. They have a trio that's better or at least as good as any trio in the country. I would say probably the best three-player grouping of anybody when they're healthy, when they're doing their thing. Obviously there's some other question marks on the team. Is the point guard play going to be good enough? Are the bigs going to contribute enough from a scoring standpoint to just take a little bit of that scoring pressure off the other 3? But in a 1-game scenario that they get to the Sweet 16, say, and they play a team like a Notre Dame or a TCU, something like that, they certainly could win that game riding those 3-star players. And then you get into a situation where they would definitely go into the next game as an underdog. But again, you're talking about even the number 1 seeds don't have a 1, 2, and 3 top players as good as LSU's. Then the differences become what happens with the rest of the roster. Those teams are deeper with productive players, but those 3 are good enough in a singular game situation to carry LSU to any kind of upset win for sure.
So you mentioned point guard. Did you see anything over the last 2 weeks from LSU's point guard position that gave you any upside for that position, or are they still struggling mightily at that?
I don't know if mightily is something I would use, but it's one of those things where it just hasn't been consistent all year, and you can kind of see Kim Mulkey her patience isn't super long with Poa, and then Dave Wilson gets in the game, and their patience doesn't seem to be too super long with Dave Wilson. If their mistakes are made, I don't know that she's necessarily settled completely on that one person or a rotation of 2 or maybe 3 people to run the show. And you know what? In some cases, it may not be necessary because flau'jae can handle the ball. Michaela Williams can handle the ball. So, but there are going to be certain circumstances. There are going to be plays where you're going to need that point guard to make a shot, make a play. But I think if they get one of them or 2 of them to be consistent during the course of a game, make a shot here, make a defensive stop, play good defense, then that might be enough. So I don't think they're far away. It's just that I haven't seen that consistency, and I haven't seen that confidence from the sideline in the point guard play to say that they're settled and they know exactly how they want to attack things.
Okay, from the SEC tournament, I know Texas, and we were talking to Corey Diaz about this earlier, but Texas had a 15-game winning streak before they ran into the buzzsaw that was South Carolina in the championship game on Sunday. But do you think that they're for real? Are they really one of the top 4 teams in the country, Texas?
I think they've earned that distinction by the season that they had. Now, would they be among my top 2 favorites to win the national championship? No. I do have concerns. I think we saw those concerns over the weekend. I think we saw those concerns not just in the South Carolina game. The way a depleted LSU team was able to hang in that game with Texas, I think was a story. A story about that Texas does have some holes. And I've actually been saying this for quite some time. People have asked me about Texas or what of the top teams now could you see not making it to the Final Four? And I go to Texas right away because of their inability or reluctance or both to shoot 3-point shots or just to shoot perimeter shots. They rely so much on getting the ball in the paint and or Madison Booker from mid-range, and they don't have that go-to weapon of a shooter, and that's a concern. In modern-day basketball, if you can't make three-pointers, that's a huge hole in how you can outscore teams. And Texas's defense is great, but we saw how poorly the offense can play, and it almost doesn't matter how great the defense is. An LSU team who at one point late in that game was hanging in there, and those 3 players that we just talked about, none of them were on the floor. Texas needs to be more explosive, I think, if they're going to win 6 games and win a national championship. And I don't, frankly, know if they have it in them.
On the other end of the spectrum, has Dawn Staley in South Carolina corrected every problem they were having during the year? And are they looking like one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the country right now?
I would put them in the top 2 or 3. I think they should be the number 1 overall seed when the final bracket comes out. But that doesn't mean that I don't think that they have holes too. We saw actually in the first 2 Texas-South Carolina games that they can be pushed around a little bit inside. And I think what the concern I have with South Carolina is in years past, there was kind of one way to beat South Carolina. Iowa exploited that one way in the Final Four a couple of years ago. But this year, they lost different ways. The game they lost to Texas was that they did get out-muscled, and they got out-toughed in the paint because they are a little thinner inside than most South Carolina teams of recent vintage have been. And then they play UConn at home, and UConn beat them in an entirely different way. Spread them out, beat them off the dribble, out-hustled them rather than out-physicaled them. And that means that there's a few more openings to get South Carolina if they're not having their best day. That means that, again, we talked about the earlier with LSU, it only takes once. The South Carolina team, it only takes once for them to lose as well, and that could happen because of some flaws.
Hey, Charlie, you're breaking up on us. We're going to let you go. We're coming up to the end of this segment anyways, but thanks a lot for your insight. Should be fascinating to see what happens here, and enjoy the tournament.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Spring is sprung, the grass is riz, I know where the library is. What's happening at the library? The 19th annual One Book, One Community series celebrating sports and youth mentorship with Jeffrey Marx's best-selling book, Season of Life. Join the library for events and activities for all ages in March and April. For details, spring over to readonebook.org. That's READONEBOOK.org.